Pearson. I'm in my home office in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Great. Good to have you, Bruce. Debbie, you're next.
Hi, I'm Debbie, she, her pronouns. I'm in my physical office in Chicago, Illinois.
Great. Kim, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Kim Vanderheiden, and I'm in my art studio in Oakland, California.
Terrific. Rhonda, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rhonda, and I am joining you from my little multi-purpose room in San Francisco on a rainy day.
Good to have you. Jill, are you with us?
Yes, hi. Jill Engel, great to be with you all. I'm here at Penn State University in my physical office.
Great. Good to have you. Julie, how about you? All right, Julie is away. Nanette, would you introduce yourself and say where you are, please?
Sure. Nanette Shore, and I am sitting in my apartment in New York City in Queens, multicultural capital of the world, some people like to call it. So great to be here.
Chris, say a word about yourself and where you are right now.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris. I'm a 3L at Fordham Law, which is where I am, in a room in the law school in New York City. So it's great to be here with you all.
Good to have you. And I am Perry Sedman. I am physically in Miami Beach, looking out over Biscayne Bay. It's a bright sunny day, about 80 degrees. And I want to welcome everyone to PISLAP. Those of you who don't know what we're about, I will just give you like a one-sentence summary that hopefully will reflect our emphasis on spirituality, law, and politics.
Terry?
Yes, Rhonda.
Just noting that Julie mentioned in the chat that she could do a quick check-in as well.
Oh, okay. I'm not looking at the chat. Julie?
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Rhonda. And just Julie. I am calling in from Gloucester, Massachusetts, about an hour north of Boston, and looking forward to this discussion. Still a little rattled by this whole election and how we go forward from here emotionally. That's really sitting with me. Thank you.
Indeed.
And Perry, we had two more people. Oh, you saw.
Diane, welcome. Can you say where you are and your name? Introduce yourself.
Hi, sure. I'm Diane Fenner. I'm calling you from my home in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm sure I'm in sympathy with the previous comments about where we stand politically. And I'm sure that, an organization has been built, a movement has been built, and regardless of the election loss, I don't think those people will disappear. So I think there's hope, and there's reasons to expect progress will continue to be made politically in spite of the loss, or at least, that's what I choose to keep uppermost in mind. So I'm very happy to be here and to hear this particular presentation as well.
Good to have you, Diane, really. Sylvia, where are you? And what's, well, I've already introduced you, Sylvia Clute, but tell us where you are right now.
I'm in Richmond, Virginia, in my dining room. So was there anything else we were supposed to add?
Not really. No, this is just a quick go round. It's good to have
Okay.
you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
I see that Robin Morris has just joined us. Robin, tell us where you are right now and what you're looking at.
Hi, yes, I am in Vallejo, California, in the Bay Area. And right now I am looking at everything I've thrown on my floor over the past few months and my keyboard.
Welcome. Good to have you with us. So getting back to what PISLAP is all about, we are an organization. PISLAP, of course, stands for the Project for Integrating Spirituality, Law, and Politics. And those are three words that you don't often hear put together. Our goal is to bring about progressive social change by integrating changes in the law brought about by political action in a way that emphasizes our connectedness and our inherent desire for a more compassionate, caring, and loving world in which we live. You can find out a lot more about our organization, if you don't already know, on our website, which is spiritlawpolitics.org. And those of you who have not become official members, I invite you to click on the right prompts on our website and officially join the organization. We'd love to have you. So without further ado, I'll turn it back to Nanette, who will again introduce Chris.
Thank you, Perry. Thanks. And welcome again, everyone. So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce Chris before he starts to talk with us. Chris and I have known each other for a number of years. Chris is a member of PISLAP and has joined us last year at one of our gatherings. He is a musician, an eco activist, a person of many deep thoughts. And I was really delighted when he offered to talk with us about the research and thinking he's been doing while in law school on post-growth economics. And I will just turn it over to Chris.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nanette and Perry and everyone for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak with you today. I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see, and just make sure that, let's see, share computer sound. Uh-oh. There you go. So it's a great pleasure to speak with you all today. I'm going to introduce a key component of solving the climate crisis, and that's the macroeconomic component, degrowth or post-growth, which is simply an economic framework that recognizes that infinite economic growth is impossible on a finite planet. But I want you to imagine a world where we take from nature only what nature can restore, but at the same time, there is enough for everyone. People only engage in necessary work, providing public services, education, regenerating ecosystems, caring for the sick and elderly, growing food, a world where things are built to last, local and regionalized economies reorient around craft instead of mass production, a world where people consume less and find more satisfaction in free time, community, family, the arts, and engagement in public life. That sounds utopian and probably not too far from a picture of the world that many of you on this call have worked the better part of your lives to build. I'm interested in the domino that pushes the other dominoes. What's in our way? We want to build an economy around human flourishing, not the mindless accumulation of capital. There's tons to explore under the umbrella of degrowth theory, but today I want to focus on three things. Number one, how neoclassical economics has failed us, the case for degrowth, essentially. Number two, how degrowth imagines the public's relationship to money. And number three, how public banks and public banking present an immediate, achievable next step to build a bridge to a degrowth society. So let's talk about economics. Degrowth is kind of a missile that strikes at the heart of the story we are told here in the West and the global. And that story is that prosperity depends on growth. We must increase consumption, productivity, efficiency year over year, or the system breaks down and we're unable to provide for our families and one another. At macro level, measured by GDP, as you know, gross domestic product, annually spent in the economy. And at the individual level, this is perhaps something like our 401k or our pension. But we know that money that is stagnant is losing value. A business that is not growing is dying. A publicly traded company that fails to increase its rate of growth and accordingly its value to shareholders risks leadership getting voted out, with a company being bought out by someone who can make it more efficient, who can make it grow. And the story is, there is no alternative. We're stuck. Gen Z shares memes decrying late-stage capitalism, and we cynically tell ourselves it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And what choice do we have? The system might be based on greed, but that's human nature. That's just the rational Homo economicus, Milton Friedman quote from his famous article in the 70s. The social responsibility of business is to increase profits. But we're bombarded, you know this, with absurdities of so-called late-stage capitalism, things that we see with our own eyes. Planned obsolescence, single-use plastics, fast fashion, my favorite, printer subscriptions. Banks are too big to fail, to enact the cheapest solution to homelessness, which is to give people homes. Average citizens work longer while their purchasing power falls. 38% of new global wealth since 1990 has gone to the richest 1%, while the poorest 50% have received only about 2% of that new wealth. If you and I stop shopping for things we don't really need, the economy falls into recession. Then there's not enough work. Retirement hangs in the balance, perhaps. Some of you may know the famous Lilla Watson quote, something to the effect, if you've come to help me, then, you know, I don't need you, but if you're here because our freedom is bound up together, our transcendence is bound up together, then hop on board. Well, I think there's a cynical perversion of that in the system that we're in, and that's that our mutual consumption is bound up together. If you don't buy the latest iPhone 16, then I don't buy a new refrigerator equipped with Wi-Fi or AI. We're both worse off. You might not have a job. I might not have money for rent or medicine. Famously, in the days after 9/11, you might remember that some of the response, the patriotic response we were encouraged to act on, considering the greatest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, was this message to go shopping. In 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted that within 100 years, people would only need to work about 15 hours a week. Advances in technology and productivity would grant us more time for leisure, study, and play. And by all accounts, he was exactly right. We have the technology and we're more productive than ever. But as you feel, growth is a cruel master. There is never enough. There is never a point where your needs are taken care of and your consumption declines. Our framework demands more. And so what does this look like? Here's real world GDP growth over the last 2,000 years or so, exponential. US GDP growth over the past 100 years in 2017 dollars. Since the 40s, governments and policymakers around the world have used GDP as a proxy for economic well-being. And naturally, our policymaking has been oriented around growth. There's per capita globally since 1750. Our fiscal and monetary policies attempt to keep the US targeted toward a healthy 3 to 5% growth per year. And that doesn't sound like much, but compound interest has a way of sneaking up on us. At 3.5% growth per year, the size of the economy doubles in 20 years. That's twice as much stuff bought and sold. And I needn't tell you, PISLAP, where GDP growth in the US has gotten us. Just a couple of statistics that are quite sorry here. One of the worst, I feel, is the 54% of adults now read below a 6th grade level. We have the lowest life expectancy in 20 years. Our poverty rate is hovering near 18%. But we're told if we just grow more, if we just get richer, we can solve these problems. But in the richest country of the world, with one of the most productive economies in the world, we're constantly fighting against rising inequality. And now we're told AI can save us. We'll have all this leisure time and we can replace more jobs with AI and automation. And I'm preaching to the choir, PISLAP, but if we're honest, advances in technology have not really improved our well-being. We work longer hours, we're more stressed, we're alienated from family and community. Social media and addiction to dopamine from our devices has made us less grounded and ironically less connected to each other. In an economy that is more productive than ever, technological progress has not necessarily made us healthier, given us more leisure time, made us smarter, or lifted people out of poverty. So what was Keynes missing with this 15-hour work week prediction? It's important to know that all this growth means something. It's real. For example, GDP growth correlates with energy consumption. It correlates with carbon emissions. It correlates with extraction from the natural world. So that graph at the bottom right is showing the billions of tons extracted from the earth every year. It's not cumulative. It's new extraction every year. But things don't grow forever, or when they do, it's called cancer. And run amok, even cancer stops at the limits of our body. The earth is no different. We see all around us the devastating effects of our over-extraction from the natural world. As you know, we're witnessing the mass die-off of species scientists call the sixth mass extinction. As Earth surpasses 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, we need not look far to notice the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation that are all around us. More severe droughts, rain events, forest fires, killer wet bulb temperatures, habitat loss, rising oceans. You know that humanity's disharmony with the natural world on the nightly news. But scientists quantify the ecological depletion in these events, codified in a measurement called planetary boundaries. That is the point at which Earth's natural systems fail to continue to operate in a way that reliably sustains life. These include things like limits on land and water use, the loss of biodiversity, the biogeochemical cycle of nitrogen and phosphorus, and atmospheric CO2 concentrations. Scientists say that once humans surpass these limits, natural systems reach tipping points and the Earth is unable to regenerate to account for pollution and extraction. And scientists say we've surpassed now 6 of these 9 boundaries. The limits to growth are visible with our own eyes. Since the 1970s, some environmentalists have highlighted Earth Overshoot Day as a signifier during the calendar year when humanity's consumption has surpassed what the Earth can restore, a point in time which occurs sooner each year. Currently, to continue to extract at sustainable levels, humans would need approximately 1.6 Earths worth of resources. Furthermore, if the entire globe consumed at the pace of Americans, the population would require 5.1 Earths. Developed countries in the global north, or what I call core economies, are responsible for 92% of the historical greenhouse gas emissions. Yet the global south, developing or what we might call peripheral economies, are now on the rise, releasing 63% of annual carbon emissions. As you know, atmospheric CO2 has risen from a historical average of 228 parts per million before industrialization to 125 parts per million today. And scientists believe a safe level is below 350. Once the Earth passes 2 degrees Celsius of warming, we risk the collapse of agricultural systems, mass migration, sea level rise, regions of the equator becoming uninhabitable, more vector-borne disease, ocean acidification, resulting in the mass extinction of marine ecosystems, complete loss of summer Arctic sea ice, and even the collapse of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulator, which would throw the global climate into chaotic and uncharted territory. And so, here's some of those slides here. This is the AMOC, which scientists are worried about. But we're not on track to reach our net zero goals by 2050. Every year we delay, the stakes and the costs rise for the future. And likely you know all this, or at least you know it's bad. But what about ESG or sustainable investing? What about decoupling growth from extraction? And this is a line you hear from most often from corporate participants in the green movement. And ultimately, the short answer is that all empirical evidence so far has arrived at two conclusions: that growth cannot be decoupled absolutely from resource use on a global scale. And number two, the rate of decoupling required to stay within 2 degrees of warming is highly unlikely, even under ideal climate policies. Are we doing a good job investing in renewables? Won't we soon hit a point where renewable energy takes over from fossil fuels? Unfortunately, not under a society and an economy addicted to growth. The tragedy of the growth imperative is that even under optimistic scenarios, we can't build renewable energy fast enough to keep up with projected growth in energy consumption. Under current projections, fossil fuels are going to be in the mix for a long time. You see this graph, the gray is all other fuels, which in this graph are fossil fuels. But before we talk about solutions, really understand what drives growth. Is this all just greed? Is this all just homo economicus? What drives the growth imperative or die? Now, I'm not discounting the role of greed in human nature and its impact on the world, but what leaves you and I unable to break free from the growth imperative? And the answer lies in partially how we create money. So right now, 97% of all new money is created out of nothing by commercial banks in the form of interest-bearing loans. This is not the radical part of this talk, by the way. This is textbook. Long gone are the days where banks served as an intermediary between borrowers and savers. So real quick, if you haven't ever taken, what's this doing? Sorry. If you haven't taken any kind of accounting class, when a bank writes a loan, that loan is counted as both an asset and a liability on the bank's balance sheet. So the loan is a valuable contract and can be bought and sold, but the loan also creates a liability, the amount of money that the consumer may withdraw from a deposit account. So the customer may withdraw that amount in cash or electronically and transfer it to another bank. And so let's watch a really quick video from the Philadelphia Federal Reserve that explains, it's an outdated concept, but it gives you an idea of what has been called the money multiplier effect. And basically, how can a bank create new money that then creates ripples throughout the economy? So here's the Philadelphia Federal Reserve.
When banks make loans, it actually increases the money supply. How does that work?
Yes.
Well, the money supply is the total amount of money available in the economy at any time. Suppose a bank has $10,000 in deposits, and it lends out $9,000. That loan initially increases the money supply by $9,000. Now, if that $9,000 is deposited in another bank, and that bank keeps 10% in reserve, $8,100 could be loaned out. Repeating that cycle over and over again until there's nothing more to lend, it turns out that the original $9,000 loan can increase the money supply by a whopping $90,000. That's how money is created. The opposite is true too. When people repay the loans, it shrinks the money supply. Here, when the first $9,000 is paid off, it reduces the money supply by $9,000. However, the bank will be quick to relend that money and return the money supply to its original size. In effect, money is being constantly created and destroyed and created again through banks' loan-making practices. When banks make...
There we go. Now, importantly, central banks have largely, around the world, have eliminated fractional reserve requirements and instead impose what are called capital requirements against the bank's deposit. But this is a looser requirement. This doesn't really restrain the banks. It's not an absolute constraint on the bank's ability to create money. It just restrains the riskiness of the lending. And so what happens when that loan is repaid? Like the video said, the money is destroyed. It leaves the bank's balance sheet. It no longer exists. Both the asset and the liability for the balance sheet disappear, except for what's left, the interest. And so we're coming to what is a key driver of the growth imperative. Banks are creating the principal, but you must come up with the interest. This effectively creates a chain of new debt where banks are owed more money than has been issued in the aggregate. And so how do we repay the debt? We have to extract real value from outside the money supply, which is what this little bubble is attempting to show. And at the end of this chain is extraction from the natural world. Jason Hickel, whose book I highly recommend to you, I'll have a reading list at the end. He has a really great quote. It says, banks effectively sell a product, money, that they produce out of nothing for free, then require people to go out into the real world and extract and produce real value to pay for it. So this is part of what drives the growth imperative. Our money can't sit still. The economy cannot exist in a steady state. Though you yourself are not going and digging for precious metals in your backyard, you are part of that chain of debt that demands new value from outside the system. And where is that value? It's in natural resources and energy. It's in squeezing further productivity and efficiency out of the workforce. It's found in skirting as many environmental regulations as you can. And that value is found in extraction, particularly from the global south. Part of the problem is that the future can't bid on today's extraction. What if we were to appropriately price in the costs of extracting from the ecosystems and appropriately price our carbon emissions? Isn't the failure here simply a failure to price our environmental impact appropriately? And the answer is yes, of course, but this isn't a bug, it's a feature. And under neoclassical economics, the ecosystem is an externality. What is the value of saving the Amazon rainforest? What is the value of saving the polar ice caps? The problem I submit to you is twofold. We cannot possibly put a price on the complete exhaustion of a resource. And when we try, the present is always biased against the future. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit. It's interesting to understanding this dynamic. So the future can't bid on today's price. What's the value of a barrel of oil to us at this moment? Maybe $100, $120, maybe less. Then what is the value to a future generation of keeping that oil in the ground? If the future could bid on today's prices, we may find that the price to extract fossil fuels, for instance, might be higher by orders of magnitude. But the future can't participate. The future can't bid on the price of oil to say it's worth $5,000 to us for you to keep it in the ground today. Instead, we're trapped in a growth paradigm where the future is always at a discount to the present. So the time value of money is a bedrock accounting principle. And you know this intuitively if you've never learned it in an accounting class. $1 today is worth more than $1 you receive a year from now. So putting that money to work for you now will provide a yield that beats the future. And so how does this play out in an with environmental considerations? Famously, the economist Colin Clark demonstrated a present value analysis where he concluded, and he mathematically proved that it was economically preferable to kill every blue whale in the ocean rather than wait and extract from the species only what the population could sustain. In other words, our traditional neoclassical economic framework says, extract all the value from the blue whales now, and you'll be better off in the future. And this sounds like nonsense, because once the whales are gone, there's no amount of money that will create the equivalent of a blue whale. But this concept of the time value of money and a future that is at a discount to the present continues to guide mainstream economics. William Nordhaus, you might have heard, is a Yale economist who won the Nobel Prize in 2018 for his decades of work modeling the interaction of climate change and macroeconomics. But even he has concluded that it is better for the future if we're to continue to focus on global GDP growth, even to the point of heading past 3 degrees Celsius of warming, because according to his math and his research, a richer future will be better equipped to deal with climate change. And this is not Chris Whittaker criticizing William Nordhaus. This is a criticism that is emerging in the last couple of years. So in other words, Nordhaus is saying, don't worry about curbing emissions too much. We'll have money to solve the problem. But until we've discovered alchemy that can somehow turn US dollars into a sustainable climate that can regrow rainforests and restore mountaintops, all we're doing is digging a hole deeper and screwing over our future selves. Planetary boundaries. So degrowth says it doesn't have to be this way. We don't need to consume ourselves off a cliff for the sake of the economy, or even for the sake of living a good, abundant life. And so how do we hit the brakes? And what does this mean for prosperity? Are we going back to the Stone Age? So degrowth is about reducing the material and energy throughput of the economy to bring it back into balance with the living world while distributing income and resources more fairly, liberating people from needless work. The British heterodox economist Kate Raworth has coined the term donut economics, which provides a simple illustration of what we're after, living within the donut. So we consume enough that we're not starving, there's not a shortfall, we're not impoverished, but we don't exceed what the earth can safely provide and replenish. So this concept of degrowth is not new. The term was first coined in 1972 by the Austrian-French philosopher André Gortz. He called it décroissance in French. Gortz thought that unending consumption was stimulated by waste and a decrease in quality of goods. Gortz wrote, "Is global balance, which is conditional upon non-growth or even degrowth of material production, compatible with the survival of the capitalist system?" That same year, the Club of Rome published The Limits to Growth, in which researchers from MIT examined the Earth's likely natural limits in 5 areas: population increase, agricultural production, non-renewable resource depletion, industrial output, and pollution. The decade saw the coalescing of the field of ecological economics with publications like Small is Beautiful and Herman Daly's Steady State Economics, in which Herman Daly simply says, "Up is best." Building on these ideas and other ecological economists, degrowth proponents today envision a slower future where governments discard GDP as a measure of progress, where competition gives way to collaboration, universal employment supports universal provisioning for human needs, economies are regionalized, the gap between the rich and poor is diminished, and humans live in balance with Earth's resources. Now, even for you, PISLAP, it's easy to hear this and be cynical. It sounds too utopian. But here's the problem, is that planetary boundaries are real. We see the signs of approaching boundaries all around us. Okay, there's a particularly stark one. By 2050, the ocean is projected to be more plastic than fish. So once the Earth reaches certain tipping points, degrowth is going to happen. Humans will be forced to consume less. Unchecked, we will reach the practical limits of what Earth can provide. And so the question is whether that future is necessarily dominated by authoritarianism, ecofascism, anarchy, or whether democratic societies can cooperatively provide for our needs. So where are we going and how do we start to get there? 2 components of degrowth I want to talk about, progressive social policies and monetary reform. I'm leaving to the side international monetary reform, which adds a whole nother half hour to this presentation. So if you have questions about that later, I can get into it a little bit, but I left that off of today. There's a lot of research and interesting things to talk about there too. So first, degrowth policy initiatives may sound very familiar to you. A basket of progressive policy proposals aimed at reducing inequality and improving the standard of living. In degrowth, work is demoted to a means to an end. Wasteful or redundant activities are eliminated. There's this great book, some of you may have seen, by David Graeber, exploring Western economy's current prediction with this idea of bullshit jobs. And so at the center of degrowth policy is a universal public jobs guarantee. But this work isn't pushing paper around. It's not bullshit. In the post-growth economy, we're providing a jobs guarantee where anyone can train to participate in urgent and socially necessary production and services. For example, regenerating ecosystems, improving public services and infrastructure, medical care, social services. The necessary funds and direction of labor could be locally managed at the municipal level, and there's a place for private and nonprofit corporations to bid on that work, exactly like they do today. And so this public work guarantee is about providing universal basic services: healthcare, childcare, adult social care, schooling, social work, and this could include everything from public transportation, housing, access to food, and even digital communications. Scholars suggest a limited role for something like universal basic income for those who cannot work, as well as provisioning for childcare, an idea that's adopted from the ecofeminist movement. This is really mind-blowing for me. Consider how capital markets fail to value one of the most central tasks in the human experience, which is raising children. By design, under degrowth, people work shorter hours as they share essential labor. Finally, we can realize the promise of technology as a way to improve efficiency and quality of life without the threat of displacing livelihoods. In a degrowth world, the role of consumerism and even advertising is diminished. It's about fostering a greater culture of use rather than ownership. This is illustrated, for example, by the idea of contemporary local tool lending libraries. Not everyone on the block needs to own a John Deere. Production is geared to longevity and repair. Once your dishwasher breaks, you don't throw it in a landfill, you fix it. And degrowth is about setting up a framework so that it makes economic sense for someone to come to your house and be trained in how to fix that appliance. We're trying to eliminate the idea of planned obsolescence. Mass production gives way to reorientation around craft. And there's a role for other progressive policies, such as worker CEO pay ratios and mandatory board seats for workers. Could Western society slow down and find satisfaction apart from competition, consumption, and constant novelty? One of the immediate reactions you may have is, this sounds great, but will people go for it? And I submit to you that that's a secondary question at the moment. The more important one is, for you, is will you go for it? Could you imagine yourself within the cultural shift that degrowth requires? A recentering of civic life, cooperation, relationships, a world where more time is spent in leisure, learning, sports, and art. It's a quote by John Stuart Mill. I'm not charmed with the ideal of life held out by those who think that the normal state of human beings is that of struggling to get on, trampling, crushing, elbowing, and treading on each other's heels, which forms the existing type of social life, are the most desirable lot of humankind. It's also worth noting that there are successful non-growing companies all over the world right now. Enterprises where management has made a conscious decision not to grow, but rather maintain a similar level of profit each year, serving a fixed number of customers and maintaining a certain level of on-the-ground control of the business's day-to-day operations. Additionally, the nonprofit model that already exists all over this country and the world provides a structure for successful enterprise that is centered on mission rather than capital accumulation. Because here's the key, is that degrowth does not actually end growth per se, but moves it away from consumption and resituates it into other realms of human flourishing and progress. And we're not talking, there we go. We're not talking about going back to Little House on the Prairie here. We're talking about going back to extraction and consumption levels circa 1970s, which is about what scientists tell us is sustainable. We want to sustain this through a culture where things are built to last, people's basic needs are taken care of, and people are engaged in only necessary work. But this basket of progressive policies can't support a degrowth society without striking at the heart of the growth imperative itself. So we now return to monetary policy and the creation of our money. Ecological economists agree that we cannot rein in consumption within planetary boundaries with a monetary system based on compound interest. Is this radically new? Actually, no. After the Great Depression, several economists put forth the Chicago Plan, which advocated resituating control of money creation exclusively back to the government, away from commercial banks. And so this included a 100% reserve requirement for banks, meaning banks could only lend out real money from their longer-term time deposits, think like CDs. No creating money out of thin air. Additionally, after the 2008 financial crisis, the International Monetary Fund released a working paper which advocated revisiting the Chicago Plan, suggesting its framework would lead to better control of credit cycles, the possible elimination of bank runs altogether, and the dramatic effect of reducing private and public debt. Some scholars want to extend ideas from the Chicago Plan, and they advocate for several foundational reforms. Number one, listed here, severely limit or prohibit commercial banks from creating new money and requiring full reserve banking. And number two, empower a democratic sovereign to issue money, potentially free of debt, directly into the economy. And so this system treats money as a public good, which is created solely by the government and then channeled to regions and localities through participatory budgeting. Under this model, the concept of a national debt actually disappears entirely because money is created through the state's budgeting process, and then money is destroyed through taxation, analogous to basically how the bank creates money through commercial loans. And that money leaves the balance sheet and is effectively destroyed when it's repaid. So here's my funny picture of the government. I'm being sarcastic, but this runs very counter to the worldview that we've all taken for granted, where the government is an inconvenient drain on the wealth creation sector. Scholar Mary Mellor calls this handbag economics, like the government is some helpless 50s housewife asking the productive sector for some spending money. Mellor argues that the recent lessons of the 2008 financial meltdown and the outpouring of public money illustrate the illogic of this view. Basically, how can the state legitimately accumulate debt by borrowing from this very sector that it is rescuing with that same debt? Mellor argues that this shows that commercial bank bailouts, quantitative easing demonstrate that at bottom, it is the government, the people, who provide capital to the banking system, not the other way around. And so under a sovereign money model, the government exercises its existing power to spend money into existence, then destroy it. By resituating the power to create money within a democratic sovereign, degrowth offers a profound transformation in the economic framework that governs how we make decisions with our money. So this is what's really key, is the choice of where to send capital is no longer driven by the cruel master of compounding interest, with its need to outrun inflation and addicted to extraction. Capital is no longer a zombie bent on mindless growth, only to be tempered post hoc by the weak restraints of sustainable investing or ESG or environmental regulation. Democratic sovereign money empowers the people in the first instance to direct the flow of money toward long-term priorities that capitalism fails to adequately value in the present: ecological and human flourishing. The idea of democratic sovereign money has particularly caught on in the UK, for example, where an organization called Positive Money has rallied around the concept as a pathway to ecological investment and social policies that reduce inequality and meet society's needs. So far, I've talked about a lot of really big ideas. Many of them feel completely out of our grasp. So in closing, the third step here, is there a way to make this at all real today? Am I just going to tell you to fly less and eat less meat? Sure, but I want to introduce you to New York State Senate Bill 1754, the New York Public Banking Act. This bill has been introduced for 3 sessions by State Senator James Sanders of the 10th District in Southeast Queens and co-sponsored by 31 other state senators. The bill authorizes municipal and other local governments to form and control public banks and to lend public credit for the public purposes of achieving cost savings, strengthening local communities, supporting community economic development, and addressing infrastructure and housing needs for localities. Bills like this have been introduced in about a dozen states and several cities around the country, as well as in the US Congress. So to demonstrate what these public banking bills are after, here's a short clip from the Public Banking Institute.
In this city, in anywhere USA, the residents of this city have decided they want a park. The city council agrees the park is a great idea. But how will they pay for it? The city needs to borrow money. But borrowing money means the city has to pay a lot more money in interest and fees that could double the cost of the park. And that money leaves the city. It goes to Wall Street investors who really don't care about the park or the city at all. This is a bad deal for the city and its residents. There's a much better option. An option that's been proven around the world. A public bank. A public bank is a bank owned by the residents of a city, state, region, or territory. Private Wall Street banks just want to make profits for their shareholders. But public banks have a mission to serve the public good. They have to reflect the values and needs of the community. And that makes all the difference. Politicians don't run a public bank. Their job is to just set it up by listening to what the people need and want. Public banks are run by skilled local bankers who know their neighbors. Residents are on the supervising board to keep tabs on what the bank's doing. Public banks can save communities lots of money. First, they cut out expensive Wall Street fees, which can be hundreds of millions of dollars a year in a big city. Second, they can lower interest rates on the city's loans, which means there's more money to spend on other projects. Third, their profits go back to the city, not to Wall Street, so a public bank can make money for the city. All this means the people of the city have a lot more money to fund all the things they need, such as bridges, good roads, good schools, renewable energy, affordable housing, lower taxes, and the park the people wanted. They now control their own money and they can build their own future. Join the movement. To find out more, go to publicbankinginstitute.org.
So public banking is about democracy, people making decisions about capital. Those decisions can be independent of the growth imperative, as the bank can charge low or no interest on projects that benefit the public. And so public banking is not the end of the story, but I submit that it's an important brick in the foundation of building a degrowth society. About a dozen states are now considering public banking legislation. Oh, there we go. Understandably, corporate interests and commercial banks don't want these bills to succeed. It means less profit for them. But we do have one long-term example. Where was it? Here we go. North Dakota has actually had a public bank for more than 100 years. They routinely return surpluses into the state's general fund to increase funding for public projects. And most impressively, it was one of the few banks that operated in the black during both the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 COVID recession. The goal of public banking and the structure of degrowth, I believe, run in parallel. So for a takeaway of something you can do following this presentation, so learn about public banking. Let your state and federal representatives know if you care about it. So I'm going to take questions in a minute. We can talk for a bit. But before that, let's address one of the key questions you have, which is, well, this sounds great, but will people go for it? The idea of degrowth, is it too scary, too unknown, and too unpalatable? And that's an important question. But again, in this moment, I think the more important one is will you go for it? Can you imagine a life for yourself that revolves less around consumption and bullshit work and more around community, democratic participation, leisure and play, care and stewardship for communal resources, universal provisioning? And so what I want to leave you with is a simple and radical mantra that there is enough. And this cuts hard against the messaging that we're bombarded with every moment. You don't have enough, you are not enough, and you will never have enough. See, the growth imperative has no end game. And we know with our own eyes that the fantasy and fetish of endless growth has utterly failed to create a just and sustainable society. And so I want to emphasize again that this is not about creating some utopia for the heck of it. We are headed toward a degrowth world, whether we like it or not, because planetary boundaries are real. And we are increasingly seeing what happens when we transgress those boundaries. We're playing musical chairs with Earth's resources. When the music stops and we come to a certain point where objectively there is not enough to provide, who is going to be making the decision about how to ration resources? Will the future be necessarily dominated by authoritarianism, ecofascism, or anarchy? Or by democratic societies that can cooperatively provide for the needs of its citizens? Can we build a bridge to an equitable post-growth society? Or will ecological breakdown force our hand in the midst of the crises of a hotter, inhospitable, and chaotic world? Building this bridge must be the work of our generation. We must foster a people who courageously answer this generation's calling toward a higher purpose, empowered through a deep well of gratitude and spirit of radical abundance. And while we still have time, our response to capitalism's scarcity mindset, irrational fear, and unsound economics must be this: there is enough. So thank you, everyone. I have this slide with some further reading that I can maybe send to Nanette and Perry to forward to you. There's a lot of great books on this to dive much deeper. And these are all the books that I'm drawing from these people. Very little of my presentation I can say is my own original thought per se, other than how it all kind of fits together. But I'll forward this to you for more reading. But with that, maybe we can have some questions and discussions.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was outstanding. Yeah, so the floor is open for reflections, discussion.
Well,
Can you, oh, go ahead, Debbie, please.
yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, and also to say that in answer to your question, I can 100% see myself buying into everything that you said, and it feels like a dream come true, honestly. And I am grateful to know that there like, thank you for presenting this because it feels like an answer to questions I've been asking. But then I think about like my husband, for example, who isn't like me and we have a shared life. So I'm just curious, like on a practical level, strategies to try to help convince others that this is doable. Thanks.
Yeah, I think initially I should share that my purpose in sharing this presentation, this is maybe the fourth time I've done a similar version of this talk, and I'm trying to do a couple more. And admittedly, like, I'm just some schmuck. Like, I've just taken the time to dive in and read this. And for me, it's answered a lot of really fundamental questions about just how does the economy work and why are we, what is finding that word of the growth imperative that drives, that seems to go against everything rational about how we provide for each other and take care of the earth. And so all that is to say is that, this material is yours now. And we all have to find the practical and political solutions together. And so I've been marinating in it for maybe a little longer, and so I'll offer my thoughts. But I'm absolutely, the problem is a lot of the people who are talking about this stuff and writing about it are sort of inward focused academics. And they're not really developing a language to bring it to people, with some exceptions in those books that I shared. But I think that somebody poked me about this the other day. They said, is this too much of an intellectual movement? Like, what's in this for blue collar workers and people? And I think there's so much in this. I actually think this is very much an anti, if you're making above $100,000 a year or whatever, like, this is stuff that is more like to you. This is stuff that says, like, actually, the way that we need to deal with retirement is not through the stock market. We need to have universal provisioning for people in retirement. And that threatens the upper middle class and middle class way of life a lot more than I think it threatens folks who are working with their hands, who just want to, do an honest 8-hour day labor. And so I think if I had one sort of wish for people, it would be to, if we could get people to articulate that money is a public good and that banks should not be allowed to freely create money. And that excludes a lot of the science and a lot of the stuff. But I think, like, there's definitely, I'm saying this in the light of the last week we've been through, there is some anti-establishment stuff here that's like, that I think can speak to people who populate a broad segment of the population. So but I have very few answers at this point about a lot of the strategy. It's just more about giving us a shared language to talk about this stuff. So thank you,
Chris. I see Rhonda and then Julie. Rhonda, go ahead.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, I'm also one of those people that's very excited. Can you hear me? Everybody hear me? Yeah, I'm also one of those people that's like naturally drawn to everything you're saying and excited to hear it articulated. And I wonder about the practicality of taking it all on. Like, as you point out, the growth imperative is like the elephant in the room, the under-acknowledged. That's a phrase we've needed. But once you have that, once you recognize that that's what we're up against and accept that that's what we're up against, I'm bringing mindfulness right on in here. Recognize, accept, investigate, like what's driving this growth imperative, and then figure out, discern some wise action in response to it, right? So thank you for giving me something to think about. But it feels a little bit like, to be honest with you, like the patriarchy or white supremacy, like the growth imperative.
Yeah, well, no, listen.
It's like so huge. And we see where we've gotten trying to fight white supremacy and the patriarchy.
Right. Well, that's
this
why
week reminded us that we got a lot of work to do there.
It's all amazing points. And I have no illusions. I am not irrationally optimistic that something like the society I'm talking about is going to be something that I see as an old man. Like, this is about like here. I mean, you know, as I'm not a historian of the abolitionist period, but like a lot of folks were working on abolition and say, and I'm sure in their mind there was like, there's no way we can tear this system down. It's been established for so long, but we got to start somewhere. And so I think one point is giving people the language of endless growth is impossible on a finite planet. This goes back to some things I would also say to Debbie's question. Just the idea of even very progressive politicians are like, we got to grow, and if we could somehow disabuse people of like, no, that's not. We need to be more precise about what we mean by that. And then I think I would point to the public banking initiative, which again is not the answer to. It's not the rocket that's going to take us to degrowth, but I think it's a really, really important step, and it's something that is absolutely achievable. It's been marinating for a while, and there's lots of good reasons to have public banks around the country, aside from degrowth. And so I think like that one thing, that's why I try to come into the presentation like, what's like one thing we can focus on, and that would be it, public banks. So.
You're awesome. Thank you so much for bringing this presentation to us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Julie, and then Bruce.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I think this is, essential, as you say. It's going to happen in one form or another, either extremely dystopian or potentially much better than where we are now. And I hate to sound superficial, but I'm sure people have raised this before, but since the idea of growth seems so positive to us, not only materially, but in every other form, is there a way to, reframe this or rename this as some kind of better growth? Or I don't know, I don't have the phrase yet, but because yeah, go ahead. And
no, I was going to say, it's very funny. It's an excellent question. And there is literally a YouTube video of two sort of post-growth thinkers who are having a debate about the name and basically saying, and the bigger question in that is, there's two things. There's the reality of the situation, and there's the political runway, and how do those two things interact? And I think I've got to change the names. I mean, and sure, I think there is a way to point toward the good things about what we're talking about, even though, yes, GDP growth becomes a non-factor, and we want GDP growth as a reflection of extraction to shrink. But is there another way to talk about it? Absolutely. And again, that's why we bring this up, because we all have to struggle with the reality of it, and then be in solidarity and come up with the political movement that pushes some of these ideas forward. So it's a great point, and I want to just honor the fact that it is a literal debate on YouTube of two academics talking about the name. And I think there is one side of it that says like the missile word idea, is it supposed to shake people up? And what would scare the powers that be and the millionaires and the billionaires more than a population who is like, actually, no, growth is, we can't have endless growth. This is crazy. Having people be able to acknowledge the fundamental thing. I think there's a lot of power in the reality of it. And so that's one thing that I after the election, especially, some of the stuff I'm saying sounds like, you're trying to envision us flying when we can barely walk. And, I think that's true. But I don't think that should scare us away from acknowledging these really difficult, but frankly, kind of elegant and simple realities.
Yeah. Well, I just want to add quickly that I think that a lot of what you're pointing to, the idea of, creating societies that are more communal, where people feel less alienated, less isolated, so many things that, research has shown people feel. I do think the Trump movement created community for a lot of people who are into those rallies and everything else. there's a lot there of the positive that people really want and need. I just not to discount that. And the more we can lean into that, and it not only just the label of it, but
yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
And we didn't even talk about, I don't spend much time because I want to get to your questions, but the reality is we can, who's doing an outsized share of the consumption greenhouse gas emissions in society? It's the very wealthy. It's the global north. The quality of life for most people in the globe, and probably for even most Americans, would go up. People working less, people's basic needs taken care of. Yeah, you wouldn't be buying a new phone every 2 years. Could we live in a place where we buy a phone every 15 years and repair it and be okay? So I think there's a lot here for. I agree about some of the language, but at the not too deep inside, there's a lot of really good things I think that people would say, yeah, if I don't have to worry about again, the mantra is there is enough. And can we, everything we hear from the powers that be is like, well, there's not enough, but that's not true. And so if we can get people to kind of come to that just like simple idea, there is enough. We just, we need to be adults and take the shard of glass out of the billionaire's mouth and say like, no, you stop playing with that. And we need to grow up here and look after each other and build a more sustainable structure. That's sort of my answer. So anyway, not to ramble on too much. Bruce.
Hi, Chris. First of all, thank you for what you're doing. I'm so inspired and admired with your passion and the way you've dug into this. I teach law students, and it's just a delight for me to see someone who's found a project, an issue that you really are feel deeply about and are really working it. So good for you. I want to give you a couple names of supporters of yours. We have a wonderful Attorney General here, Keith Ellison, who used to be a congressman from Minneapolis. He used to use the phrase "there is enough" in his speeches as kind of a call and respond thing. And he very much is along your line of thinking. Another person, Rabbi Michael Lerner, unfortunately, he passed away a few months ago. He was the editor of Tikkun magazine and a kind of a guru for a number of us. And he talked, and I think wrote at the time of the banking collapse in 2008, that this was a perfect opportunity the flaws in this banking model were so apparent that he saw an opportunity for a public bank that never really happened. But I wanted to put in your lap the issues I've heard with this philosophy over the years and just see what you think. There's kind of two categories. One is human nature. You call it greed. You could also call it, a restless ambition, dissatisfaction. It's the way people are hardwired. I tell my students the genes of a squirrel that is satisfied with one nut will not make it into the next generation. If you have people, engaged in crafts and child raising, there'll be some who will want to excel, make more, have more, be more, do more. I will say this organization of which we're a part here continually talks about how do we grow? How do we get more members? How do we get more resources? The other thing about human nature is people don't value their well-being economically according to an absolute standard. It's all relative. I want more than other people have because that's what makes me feel good. So that's one issue which you may have thought about. The second are the technological and demographic issues that always arise with these plans. Back when maybe I was closer to your age, there was talk about the productive capacity of farmland was reaching an end. And then there was the Green Revolution, and all of a sudden there was lots more food. Now, my impression is that a nuclear fusion is reaching the break-even point, and that even the modular fission reactors are becoming cost-effective. So there may be, there may be very cheap energy on the horizon. And then also depopulation, I think, may accomplish a lot of the things that you're thinking about anyway. I apologize for putting that all in your lap, but I'm very interested in these ideas. They're very essential, and I'm so admiring what you're doing. I want to make sure you're well armed with answers to the things that come up
Well,
about
thank
it.
you. Those are excellent. And as your law students say, I will take your questions in turn. I would say that there is two great books, especially Jason Hickel's Less is More and oh gosh, Tim Jackson, Prosperity Beyond Growth, really both get into the human nature side of this. And I'll share one anecdote that I may not relay correctly, but I'll do my best. Basically, a study at Yale or Harvard where they got a large group of people together who had to decide how to divide up some shared pile of resources. And when it was sort of a free-for-all, inevitably after a generation or two of this exercise, things ran out. But when sort of an element of democracy was introduced into this game, sort of the 60% or the 70% of people kept the 30% who were inclined to take it all now, sort of fail the marshmallow test, kept them at bay. It's an anecdote that I think Tim Jackson talks about a bit. Another thing I'd say about the restless ambition.
Is that that example in one of the books you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's either in Tim Jackson's book or Jason Hickel's, and I can find it. I should, if with a longer presentation, I would reference it. But the point is that most of us are not. There are a proper democratic structure can help us to temper some of the greed and human nature. To the idea of the restless ambition and satisfaction, I have to look up this quote because it's a really good quote, but I don't know if it's Da Vinci, but I think my head is it's Da Vinci, but it's something like he was talking as an artist, the more limited I am, the more freeing things become. And so I see a lot of this as putting limits and constraints on ourselves that will allow us to think more creatively in different ways. And so, when fewer people have cars or when fewer people are flying, that just means that there's a much more creative opportunity for what our train system looks like in public transportation, just as an example. And so I don't necessarily tie ambition to consumption. And I think those things can be decoupled. That would be my answer. To the relative stature, that's something that both Hickel and Jackson get into. And you're absolutely right that a lot of our nature is we just want what our neighbor has, or we want more than Bob over here. And so the point is that on the whole, we can be as humans, we can be very happy with consuming less. It's sort of a positive answer to your question, which is like, yes, that is how we are. And that's why we can be happy with consuming less, because it's more about keeping up with each other, keeping up with the Joneses than then we have to.
We'll make it a virtue to who can have the least. That'll be the competition. Yeah, great.
And I don't know about nuclear fusion, except that it's always 30 years away. I will make a point about the depopulation point. And this is the reason that so many economists and upper class fear something like depopulation, because as you know, the pyramid scheme starts to fail. But in a shrinking population model, degrowth has no problem. It's just a matter of, can we do it gradually enough, have enough people who are making a living, caring for the elderly, caring for one another, social services. It just means we have less investment bankers, and we have less marketing specialists, and less LinkedIn recruiters, and we have more people as nurses and doctors. I mean, that's a little bit of a simplistic answer, but I think to me that's what sort of rings true, is that we don't have to fear depopulation when our livelihoods aren't inextricably tied to this growth imperative. So those are my initial responses, but everything you said deserves more thought and more research for sure.
You're doing great work, Chris. Thanks.
Maybe as our last question, and then I'll wrap up. Rhonda, you put a couple of reflections in the chat. Did you want to amplify any or just leave them out in the chat?
Well, I would love it, my dear Chris, if you just those two questions, one about terror management and dominance theory. I mean, I don't know if any of the writers address those specific, in a way, theories that help us understand that these dynamics are not necessarily human natural, but they're cultivated at times. We can counter cultivate them, right? So there's some theories out there that I think we could hopefully integrate into this conversation. Maybe that's work to be done. But the one that if you have a minute to reflect with me on, I'd love to take the time here to do this one about Indigenous and First Nations cultures, because everything you're talking about, I've been the teeny bit of information I get from in my travels about Indigenous values and First Nations people's values. They're all everything you're talking about. Yep. And the fact is that we nevertheless have been in this culture war against those very values for a very long time. So it's not just racial war, it's culture war. It's these values being in conflict. So I'm curious if you have.
Yeah, I'll have to look up the dominance, what is it called? Dominance, ambitions, terror management. I think
dominance theory and then terror management theory, two kind of social psychological theories that help explain how hierarchies persist, and the underlying social psychological kind of terror that drives some of these dynamics that Bruce is calling human natural. We'll see. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think to your point about Indigenous culture, absolutely spot on. It's sort of a meta narrative in what I'm saying. I think Jason Hickel does a nice job talking about the history of capitalism in his book, and he talks about the enclosure period. If anybody knows about this, in in the medieval Europe, where peasants were working. They were working the land like a third of the year, and the rest of the time was festivals and their life expectancy actually went down after the wealthy sort of landowners enclosed the space and forced them to commodify the land in a certain way. It's not a period of history I know a lot about, but I think again, for me, it's about like this where my head has been at with this presentation, with these ideas, is what's the domino that pushes the other dominoes? What's the thing that's stuck? Why isn't our system able to, we talk a lot about Indigenous values and how we want to model the folks who are taking care of like about a third of the globe's resources at this point. And for me, it's like, okay, well, what is it about our system of capitalism? And Jason Hickel's point is, this is new. This is only in the last couple hundred years that capitalism, and we're not talking about eliminating markets. We're not talking about eliminating trade as a thing, but the specific idea of enclosure and capitalism and commodification is relatively new. And is there a way to pivot ourselves out of that? So I think it's spot on about how this is about returning to be more compatible with Indigenous values that are sustainable. And Sylvia, you had a question about banking?
I do. So early in my legal career, which was during the women's movement, we started a new type of bank. It was called a women's bank. There were only 5 in the country. So as you were talking, I'm wondering, in states where they have these public banks, or they're passing legislation, can individuals, are there provisions in those laws for individuals to start a public bank?
So I have more to learn about this too. My understanding of the public banking legislation that's being advanced around the country is that these are banks run by the state or run by a city that are going to fund they're going to fund projects and investment and development. They're not necessarily retail banks. What they can do, is my understanding, is they can help provide funding and capital to community banks and what are they called? Community banks. There's another word for them. I have a banking regulation class right now, so I should know this.
Like credit bureaus?
Yeah, credit unions.
Credit union.
Yeah. And so there is a way for these public banks as designed to help community banks, credit unions that are helping people who haven't had good access to capital and money and are underbanked, as they say. There is a mechanism for that, but public banks are not retail banks as these are designed. It's more about a place for the state to put its own tax money and then direct, the states, the people say, we want to build a wind farm. And Chase says, yeah, but it's not going to be profitable because da 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 da. The public bank can say, well, we don't care. We want this wind farm because we're dealing with this, the here and now. So that's the
so why
simplistic.
Why couldn't the rules be written that individuals can begin these banks? They just say, deposit your funds with us instead of somewhere else. And this is the way we will use the money, and it'll be regulated. So you have to use the money that way. But I mean, why can't individuals, why do they have to be done by the government? Why can't individuals do it and run it on deposits from people who want to have this type of bank?
Well, I think that the hope is that that's coming. And, one of the, the question around a lot of this is, what's the political strategy? Where do we go from here? I think that in my mind, we don't have time to tear down the current thing before we build the new thing. And so I think like focusing on that, building that new thing and just cracking open the door to public banking, public money, and then opening up maybe in more ways like you're suggesting, Sylvia, where there is a retail model that starts to shift our money away from some commercial interests. That may be a way to go. That again helps us, sort of like the opening of Indiana Jones when he's pouring the sand. It's like build the new thing as the old thing is, to make the old thing obsolete. It's kind of how I think about it. But anyway, Nanette says we're late, so we have a question from Kim.
We have from Kim, and Kim will be our last question.
Sorry.
Thanks. And sorry we missed you earlier.
That's okay. My question really dovetails well with what Sylvia is saying. So I'm in the process of starting a nonprofit. I have a 501c3. It's based on being a community, and it's based on how do we live in active love in a way that's nonviolent. And in the way that I've written the bylaws and such, it like what you're saying about the degrowth economy and moving beyond capitalism, like this is all sort of baked into the nonprofit. And I'm thinking, like, could a nonprofit such as the one I'm working on building, that is community-based, like I think looking at the political climate, like good luck selling this, but could we just build it? Why not? What can we do? Can we make our own community that basically has its own government that builds this? And then use that as an example, and then people don't see it as so new. They're like, oh, look at how the people in this community are thriving. Let's expand it.
Yeah, I think there's so much great research that I couldn't include in this short presentation, but a couple examples. There are examples of alternative currencies around the world. There's something in Japan called time banking, where instead of money, people are signing up for an hour of take care of my kid or take care of this thing, and sort of they're trading physical hours. I think the example of the local tool lending library as a model for the future, again, about the culture of use. Those are the kinds of things, community gardens, things that we can do now that start to introduce the culture of sustainability ahead of the degrowth sort of economic model.
I'm more thinking bigger, like actually taking deposits and doing investments and banking. Like a lot of what we serve are people who are in need of housing. And the kind of things that you need to, and they're already really community focused. And the kind of things that you need to do, it's not like like the tool lending libraries and this time banking. Yeah, that's already happening. That's like a no-brainer. I'm talking about going bigger.
Yeah, well, my only, I don't know, except that I'll say two things. You would have to see what you can do without running afoul of existing banking laws, because I'm sure there comes a point where some part of the activity, maybe if you're doing this but you don't have a charter, starts to run afoul of some kind of regulation. There might be a lot you can do, and that's what I'd be curious to see, like how much can you do that doesn't intersect with, well, now you're sort of de facto, you've become essentially a bank and you're operating illegally. That would be I would want to sort of answer that question for myself. But then also I want to emphasize, I go over it so briefly in the presentation, but the nonprofit model, people are like, how can we exist? How can we provide for each other without corporations and without business? It's like, well, we're already doing it through nonprofits. It's just like, how do you know when a nonprofit has been successful? They have the anecdotal, qualitative, quantitative data. We've accomplished the thing. The government gives you money to build public housing, or to raise test scores, or to take care of this population in this way. Whatever the mission is, it's mission based. You don't have to make a return. Once you're done, you're done. And so I think that the role of nonprofits in this sort of degrowth model is the name of the game. And so I would love to do more research and talk further about what you're working on. I hope that if we push for these public banking laws, that it'll open up more doors to come, that allow you to do even more.
I would love to brainstorm with somebody on, could that happen? I realize it's a big project. Could that happen, and could it go forward, and what would be the next steps to researching it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your input and your questions. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really outstanding. And, just thinking about PISLAP, it truly embodies all the different components of what PISLAP is really about. I was thinking about, from the perspective of the spiritual component, the whole message about enoughness, and even on the inner level, do we feel we're enough? Do we feel we have enough? There's so much wrapped up in that, in addressing the whole concept of enoughness. And I love the quote by Peter Gable that Rhonda put in the chat. He said, we need to create places where we can experience the there is enoughness that you say exists already. So
that wasn't literally a Peter quote, but it's
it wasn't
inspired by Peterness that's in me.
Even better, inspired by Peterness. And of course the legal component, there's statutes out there, and we can play a role in talking about the impact of that legislation and why it would be supportive and helpful. I was also thinking that it ties very much to some of our previous presentations. If some folks might have heard Jenny Nadelsky, who spoke with us about the care economy, and that she's been thinking about. There was a lot in here for us to think about more together. And so, Chris, I really want to thank you for bringing this conversation to PISLAP, and to be continued. And I see Sylvia sent you a note in the chat, and I suspect Kim would like to stay in touch too. So thank you again, everybody. And thanks for staying a little late. It was a great conversation and worth a little extra time. So
Thank you, Chris.
How many here will be in Durham? Everybody? Or Chris? Oh, good.
No,
We'll
not
see you there.
everybody.
Okay. Well, yes. Looking forward to seeing you.
I'll see you there.
Yeah. All right. Be well and safe, everyone, until we meet.
You too.
Indeed.
Bye.